Bob, before we were rolling, you told me quickly that you had an experience where a woman, a stranger, total stranger, came up to you right after 9/11 in a parking lot.
I had gone to vote that morning. We had a local election. I went into the firehouse. I passed the fireman's TV screen, and there was this image of the World Trade Center and a plane going into it, and we all gaped. I went home and called my wife and went to a store. I was in the parking lot of a store, and a woman came up to me, a total stranger, and said, "That's it, our lives will never be the same. Utterly different now." And she walked away. And in retrospect, she was absolutely right. It's true. We are a different culture now than we were then. We feel more vulnerable and more aware of all the kinds of dangers and bad things that could possibly happen. So I do think that's weighing in on us as a culture. And certainly my students seem more wary and concerned than they were in the 60s. Also in the 60s, it was a much more prosperous time. And you didn't worry about good jobs. You didn't worry about careers because those things were around. But now, for young people coming out of college, it's a very serious concern. And certainly for people who are in the arts, it's particularly serious. I have many, many students who are painters or sculptors or filmmakers or whatever, and they love what they're doing, and then they say to themselves, so how am I going to support myself? How am I going to make a life of this? And many of them struggle, and many of them do, however, somehow find a way. It may not be what they thought, but they do find some way to do that. But it takes courage and strength.
Would you say that's the #1 question you receive from all your pre-graduates while they're getting close to finishing up their last years in college? Is that their biggest concern?
They don't usually put it in words. They put it in actions. I sit there and say, okay, so what's next? And they begin to sort of say, well, I don't quite know. I'm a little worried about that. I have to make some plans. I'm looking for this job and that job. So it's certainly on their minds in a way that I think hasn't been on people's minds for many, many years. That's one of the darker sides of our contemporary life.
And so how do you feel that's reflected in the films that they're making today, that even the little things you're seeing on YouTube and in the big studio films? How do you feel that whole unknown, because there really isn't a set path anymore? I know back in even my time growing up in the 80s, if you did a certain, A, B, and C, you felt that you were going to get an outcome from it. And I think that all of that is gone. It's not around. So how do you feel that's reflected in the...
Well, I think some of the bigger movies today express that. I think a movie like Fight Club. Fight Club seems to me utterly, unbelievably anxiety-provoking and full of angst. And so I do think that films that do succeed now do to some extent articulate that kind of thing.
So they don't actually say to you, I'm scared, I'm worried about how am I going to support myself, but you see it, you say in their actions in terms of...
Yeah, who wants to talk about that kind of stuff?
I do. I want to make a video about it.
Well, maybe, but most people want to sort of prevail over it and tough it out.
Sure.
So it's not something people talk about very much, but honestly, you do feel when you have been around for a couple of years that different times have different tempers, and this particular time is a troubling one.
Do you feel that they think it's a weakness on their part? Do you see maybe a different level in, let's say, millennials, more so than Generation Xers, which is my generation, that maybe they don't want to talk about anything that's considered weak?
Yes, I do, because one wants to be powerful and wants to be strong and wants to be in control of one's life. And there are so many reasons nowadays that young people can't do that or have difficulties achieving simple things, finding a way, making a living, finding a mate, and the sort of level of disaffiliation, of sheer loneliness that I find in my students is really quite alarming. I just wish that more of them could sort of live happily with friends and find a kind of meaningful way for themselves. But it's harder now. It simply has gotten harder. I'm reminded of those horrible days, after World War II, when the Italian neorealists were making movies, and they were making movies about people struggling on the street and attempting to sort of make some sense of their lives after the World War was over, and they couldn't get film, and they couldn't find jobs. Italy was basically bankrupt. So those kinds of things are, to some extent, reflected in the world in general now.